This will be your first video lecture in Unit 1, and if you'll please turn to page 5 of your handbook, we're going to get started with the very first set of notes. We're going to be looking at science itself, and the reason it's actually really important for us to take some time to think first about what science is something that was even in the Charlotte Observer just a few days ago about an NC State professor who feels that his colleagues actually built a $1 million research project on false foundations. And so one of the things when we're looking at the idea of science is, how do we want scientists to think? It is a slightly different way of thinking, and as one of my students asked me for a very long time in class, why should I believe what you are saying? So that's what we're going to look at, starting here on page 5. Science is not just a collection of facts, even though that is how it's probably felt in science class. You sit there, you write things down, you memorize things. But rather, science is a method of investigating nature and discovering reliable knowledge. And so where we're going to work here is this idea of investigating. And investigating really starts with, if you'll add in what I'm adding in, a question. So it is exactly right in this class that you should be asking questions. You should be wondering about what you see. And a lot of the important knowledge has always come from questions that start with why and questions that start with how. So these are words that you're going to hear me say a lot in this class. Now we also have this idea of reliable knowledge. It has a high probability of being true. So in science, there's a very small number of things that we can say with 100% certainty are true, but rather that they are really highly probable of being true because we use a reliable method. And these are things that we're going to discover throughout the year. Now, if you didn't have time to get all of these words copied down, remember, just press pause on your video and you'll be able to copy the words down, and then when you're ready to continue, press play again. But we're going to go forward to talk a little bit about some critical components to being a scientific and critical thinker. There are really 3 components, and so the first is the use of empirical evidence, evidence that you can experience. And so what you're going to find in this class is that we will do a lot of labs. We will try to do as much of the learning by you experiencing it as possible. However, some of the knowledge that we need to gain, we can't experience here at Butler High School because we don't have some of the advanced technology that other scientists have. The other practice is logical reasoning, and it requires a careful analysis of evidence before we try to deduce or induce. Now, deductive reasoning is drawing conclusions based on evidence. So, for example, if we happen to see that there are 3 days of rain, that would be our evidence, and then we can draw a conclusion based on that evidence. And that would be deductive reasoning. Because there are 3 days of rain, I know that what will happen is that my neighborhood will flood. However, there's also inductive reasoning, which is expanding conclusions. And this might be the idea of by or because. Since there were 3 days of rain, the neighborhood will flood because the sewer drains allow pine straw to go down there and clog them. And so inductive reasoning is trying to present an additional conclusion. And so in this class, you're going to be asked to do a lot of both of these. What is the evidence, and what do I expect to be true? And then what is my explanation? So evidence, conclusion, and then expanding on that. This is all going to be really important because you started a lab today in class. And so we really want to think about this lab and how we're thinking as scientists. Not just what do we expect to see, but even the use of skepticism. You should be asking questions, wondering, is this what I expect? Do I have enough knowledge to make an expectation? Do I need to maybe look at some more evidence first? Do I need to collect more evidence? And so skepticism is a really important skill in a science class for a critical thinker. It's the idea that you hold your beliefs tentatively. Skepticism isn't that you refuse to believe in anything. Skepticism is that you hold a belief tentatively until you require adequate evidence or reason. And so in science, it's this idea that we're trying to test ideas, make discoveries, collect evidence, and then make our conclusions and question if they are the right conclusions, which is what this NC State professor is doing. So what we're going to do is take a second to look at what's called the scientific method. You've probably heard this in a lot of your classes before, and some scientists will even say this isn't exactly how it works. However, there are some important ideas here. The first being that most scientists start with an observation. So let's, for example, use Alexander Fleming. This is the man who accidentally discovered penicillin, the first antibiotic that was isolated. His observation, so an observation means that you are examining data. And so his observation, the example would be that he saw that no bacteria grew near the fungus. That was his observation. He was trying to grow bacteria, and his plate where he was growing it, just like yours, was actually contaminated with fungus, and he was ready to throw it out. But he actually looked closer, and what he observed is that anywhere the fungus was, there were not bacteria. So that was just his observation. And from there, he asked a question. And really, this comes down to wondering. How and why? This is where the how and the why become important. So his question is, why do fungi prevent bacterial growth? So when you make an observation, the next step is to wonder how or why. Then we form a hypothesis. Now this is where we have to be very careful. A hypothesis in science should start with if, ... then ... And what goes in between here is if what we call the independent variable. Independent variable. Then the dependent variable. These are new words for us. Independent variable and dependent variable. New words, perhaps. Independent variable is what you change in your experiment. And the dependent variable is what you measure as a result. So I can be doing an experiment with water and plants, and I can be measuring both how much water I put in and how tall the plant grows. But which one of those is the dependent variable? Which one of those is the result? Is the result how much water I add, or is the result how tall the plant grows? So the result there would be the dependent variable. The independent variable is how much water I'm actually adding. And so forming a hypothesis doesn't mean that you know that you're going to be right. However, you have started with an observation. And so a hypothesis often tries to get the same result that you saw in your observation. Then we conduct an experiment. And the most important part about conducting an experiment is actually documenting your steps and the reasons. Knowing why I did this step. Why do I need to heat this before I add it? Why do I need to add this much and not that much? And then at the end, we're going to have to analyze our results. And so we do want to kind of add that in. Analyze results. And based on our results, we will either accept our hypothesis or reject our hypothesis. And what might be hard for you to see here is that the arrow actually goes back up and over to forming a hypothesis. So the idea is that there's constantly a cycle. There are always next steps. So even if you accept your hypothesis, you're going to really be starting over and looking at what are your next steps. So what exactly does biology study, right? That's a general overview of science. What about biology? Biology or science is divided into different ways of looking at the natural world. You could be looking at physics, you could be looking at chemistry or earth science or oceanography. In biology, we're really studying life. And I do want you to actually circle the term bio. B-I-O. Bio actually means life. And that's really important because you'll see bio a lot in this class. Bioinformatics, biotechnology, biotic. And we want to know that bio means life. And the smallest unit of life is a cell. And that's a really important. Put a big star and exclamation point there, because the smallest unit of life is a cell. So we might be studying single-celled organisms like bacteria and fungus and amoebas, like brain-eating amoebas. We might be studying multicellular organisms, where the cells are arranged into tissues. For example, your body has cells that are arranged into skin tissue. And then you have organs like a heart, and organ systems like the circulatory system or the digestive system. And so we are going to be spending some time really looking at first, what is the smallest unit of life, and then how do those cells interact together. So we need to know what cells are made of. Everything. Whether it's living, like this orange or tangerine or clementine, or non-living, like this roll of tape. Everything is made of what's called matter. And the smallest unit of matter is an atom, a single solitary atom. And if you remember the periodic table, there are lots of different atoms. So we're going to be starting the year by remembering, yes, we're studying cells, but a cell is made up of things as well. And so we're going to be looking at atoms and how multiple atoms can form a molecule. If you'll put a big star or exclamation point by this part here, multiple atoms are held together by bonds to form both small and large molecules. And so the very last part of our notes is just the idea about what are the important atoms that we'll be starting to study with. All matter is composed of atoms of elements. Important elements to life include carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Other important elements are abbreviated as CHNOPS. The N is for nitrogen. The P is for phosphorus. And the S is for sulfur. And so we're going to be seeing that we can arrange these atoms to form molecules. So here we have a single atom. We put multiple atoms together and we form molecules. Out of those molecules, we can actually form cells. Those cells can form tissues, which can form organs and body systems and organisms and populations and communities, and the ecosystem and the whole world is built of atoms. Some important molecules that I want you to know, look at this one, H2O, CO2. H, hydrogen, is an atom, but H2O is a molecule because the H's and the O's are bonded together. So we're starting by remembering what an atom is and what a molecule is.